The collaborative work environment performed market research on environmental, social, and governance, also known as ESG, for the Diversity Consortium. This presentation summarizes the market providers, the system functionality, and the challenges around ESG. What is ESG? ESG is focused in on three main pillars. Environmental is the impact on the planet. Environmental programs, sustainability programs, utility programs have been around for decades. The systems, the vendors, the suppliers are robust and have been in a lot of acquisition and merger activity. The social pillar focuses in on the relationships with employees, customers, and the community impact. And governance is the corporate leadership standards of the organization, focused in on corporate boards, shareholder rights, and relationships. ESG has been in the news quite a bit recently. A lot of large organizations across industries have been announcing ESG goals and objectives. So as we take a look at ESG, we're really going to do that in each of the pillars. So as we look at environmental, again, this is impacts to the earth, impacts to the environment. This is carbon, both 1, 2, and 3 reporting, and includes sustainability initiatives in reporting. As you look down into the base of environmental, you start to get into the building management and fault diagnostic and detection. The environmental landscape is quite robust. As we look at the bottom here in the network and control layer, this is really where you have your building automation systems and building management systems. Folks like Trane, Honeywell, Schneider, all groups that have been in the game for a while. As you take a step up, you get into your networking and data acquisition. We see folks like Blue Pillar as well as Urjanet who have tied in connectivity for utility data. As we get into the application layer, there's a lot of applications that are trying to pull in a variety of data sets, whether it's the utility side or it's more focused on the building automation side. And at the top layer here is the analytics, so the groups that are focused on leveraging the utility data, the building automation data, the sustainability data into a business rules or analytics engine. In our social channel here, we're really looking at three different system categories. Typically, it's the enterprise resource planning, it's the environmental health and safety, and then it's the data enrichment providers, which are often forgotten within the social landscape. So as you look at the providers here, we're really going to break it down into those three system category types. So from an ERP perspective, these are a lot of the large organizations that we're all familiar with: Oracle, IBM, Sage. All systems that have grown over the years and contain a lot of the information around finances, employees, and social impact. As we look at environmental health and safety, these are niche providers around health and safety measures and documentation and audits, a little bit of risk management within that as well. And then the diversity, equity, inclusion, data enrichment providers, which are taking financials, accounts payable systems from organizations and leveraging public records of minority classifications to begin to classify and categorize organizational spend to baseline what they're spending into different geographies. The last pillar here that we're taking a look at is governance. Governance has been a corporate standard for many decades. GRC, or governance, risk, and compliance tools, have been tools that organizations have used, typically managing policy, risks, audits, compliance. As we take a look at the landscape here, we'll see that this market really breaks down into vertical or horizontal focus groups. You have some niche providers or groups that focus into specific categories, and then you have your broad suite providers like Metric Stream or Logic Gate that sort of take the gamut of functionality you see across the top. And at the bottom here, you begin to see the consulting groups, which leverage a host of those applications, typically in a white labeled fashion, to deliver programs to their end customers. So as you look at those three individual pillars, traditionally those three have been disparate from a corporate or executive perspective, have sort of been their own programs. So with the formation of ESG, these three pillars now start to come together, which has caused a new landscape to form. So you look at the ESG vendor landscape, which includes the consultants and the data providers, you see a lot of the same consulting vendors around the outside of this, all familiar with the IT service providers like Accenture, Capgemini on the right. But what we start to focus in on here as we go into the technology vendors are the main vendors that are housing a bulk of this ESG data. No surprise that a lot of these are the ERP systems, Workday, SAP, Oracle. And then in the inside of this graphic, we have all of the data and analytics vendors that are providing public data, market data, utility data, investment data for the rest of these applications to consume. As we take a look down into that data and consulting providers, is giving us a better picture of the ESG market today. So we look at this in the market data, and we're familiar with those market providers, Moody's, Bloomberg, the ESG exclusive platforms. So these are groups that are providing ESG rankings against corporations, and then the specialty groups, which are looking in at gender equality, climate risk, real estate. Again, same consultants and advisories leveraging that technology and that data to then go drive ESG programs for their customers. There's a few key ESG challenges that we found in the marketplace, and what that is really the ability to identify the data sources. If you're in a Fortune 1000 organization, you typically are not on one ERP or not on a standardized utility or sustainability platform. So in many cases, you've acquired portfolios and you have maybe 5, 10, in some cases 50 to 100 different systems. So there's a challenge and a lot of resource that it takes to go and identify those resources, understand how they've been implemented, understand how that data is going to be extracted and centralized for an enterprise level view to the ESG program. The second thing we found is this shifting of operations and culture, right? You see you're not spending what you need to with minority vendors. There's a culture change and there's an operation change that needs going to need to take place as we start to redirect those expenses to minority groups. The anticipation of future standards and requirements. We all know that frameworks and the standards are constantly changing. So staying up to pace, being educated on what those are, it is challenging for any group. And the last two here, I think keeping abreast of the stakeholder sentiment, obviously understanding where the market's going, where people are putting their money, what your stakeholders are looking for. We all know that it's driving more off of environmental and social impacts. And then just trying to grab and put your arms around the third party aspect of ESG and how do we start to manage our suppliers and make sure that they have the right reporting and framework in place. So sort of consolidating down, we really saw this as a data issue for organizations. They typically have invested the money to put systems in place. It's now just about understanding where the data lives, defining the important ESG metrics, and then aligning those metrics to the goals of the organization. So with that, I hope this brief overview gave you some insight into ESG if you've never heard it before, the pillars, the vendors, and the system functionality of each, and how this ESG landscape is growing and some of the challenges that are going to need to be solved as we continue to pioneer ESG programs for organizations. Thank you.